Joining me now, Congressman, 3rd District, Democrat Bobby Scott. Congressman, it's great to have you, sir.
Good to be on your show, John. Good to haven't talked to you in a long time.
I know. I told David we've got to get you on at least on an every other week basis. I'm going to try to set that up today when I get back from CNN. Let's get to the State of the Union speech Tuesday night. You know, the economy is doing pretty good. You have to admit that, Congressman. I mean, black unemployment all-time low, jobs up, bonuses up, people coming in, getting raises, 401ks, retirements, those are up, people feeling good about it. Yet a lot of your colleagues sat there kind of stone-faced and somber. What was that about?
Well, I think he's trying to take credit for something he hadn't done. I mean, the change in his economic plan just passed in December, and he's taking credit for the year before. That's essentially the Obama economy. And during that time, he said he created last year 2 million jobs. Well, actually, that's about the same, just a little less than several years with Obama. And I think may have been the worst in the last 6 or 7 years. There's been pretty constant job growth over the last since the recession, and when he took over, it just kept going at pretty much the same rate. So taking credit for that. Now, when his tax cut comes in, we'll see what that does. But it's the way they did taxes and whatever growth they get out of it is really the worst growth that you possibly could have achieved with a $1 trillion expenditure. You'll get some growth. One estimate was you'll get about 300,000 jobs. One conservative economic think tank said about 300,000 jobs. With $1.5 trillion, you really ought to be around 20 million jobs if you had done it in infrastructure targeted to people who will actually spend the money, rather than 80-some% going to the top 1%. You'll get some growth, but of everything you can do with $1.5 trillion, the economic growth will be the worst of any other thing you could have done. Creating jobs, infrastructure, invest in education, health care, lower-end tax cuts. I mean, just about anything else you could have done, you would have created more jobs. So we'll just have to see.
So, Congressman, you're basically saying, and I know we had this discussion during the tax cut debate, that you would have rather seen another $1.5 billion stimulus package rather than put that money back in the pockets of people. And
well, he's talking about a $1.5 trillion infrastructure plan. I think
right.
That would definitely create jobs. The problem is we just spent $1.5 trillion and didn't pay for it, and the question will come up: where are we going to get the money? That's why we're having trouble keeping government open. People have counted the money, and with the tax cuts, money will not be coming in, and we can't afford to pay our bills. And so when you do a budget, you look at revenues and you look at expenditures. You try to get them pretty much in line. And when you spend $1.5 trillion in tax cuts, you can't pretend that it doesn't have anything to do with the budget and expenditures. And so we just have to see. It's going to be very difficult, one, to pass a budget that can keep the government open. That's the problem we've got now. And then trying to figure out how you can pay for a $1.5 trillion infrastructure plan. I think there's strong bipartisan support for infrastructure. I'd like to see school construction be part of it, and infrastructure to make areas more resilient to sea level rise. Norfolk area is second most vulnerable to sea level rise in the United States, second behind New Orleans. And there are things you can do to make the area more resilient, less vulnerable to flooding. But those initiatives are very expensive. So
Congressman Scott,
but at some point you have to recognize that arithmetic matters.
Would you be in favor?
You mentioned the Family Medical Leave Act. I think there'd be good bipartisan support for that. But again,
right.
You have to pay for it. There are innovative ways of paying for that, where it kind of pays for itself. Everybody puts up a little bit every week, and it's like unemployment compensation. When you go out on leave, then you can draw down on that. The employer doesn't have to pay for the paid leave. But there are there's a lot of things we'd like to do. The Higher Education Act, where we're going to make college and universities more and job training more affordable. You can't do that if you don't have any money. And when you start off with a $1.5 trillion tax cut that's not paid for, then you have a lot of challenges with some of the other things he wants to do.
So let's get back to infrastructure. Would you be open to the idea of increasing the national gasoline tax to pay for it, or a tolling system? Because the problem with the tolls is the infrastructure just isn't roads. It's bridges, it's tunnels, it's our seaports that are crumbling. I mean, why not just do a gas tax, that adds up to $1.5 trillion, and when it's paid for, the tax goes away? What would be the matter with that?
There's strong support for an increase in gas tax and a gas tax. There's also strong opposition. There's no magic to it. You have to pay for it. And I know when we were trying to improve the tunnels in Norfolk, between Norfolk and Portsmouth, a lot of people said, well, I don't want to pay tolls. And we said, well, how about an income tax? I don't want to pay an income tax. Well, I don't want to pay a sales tax. Well, you got to pay for it some kind of way.
Got to pay for it. Yeah, you're right. I mean,
they're not going to build
you got to pay
themselves.
for it.
And so that's the challenge we have if you're going to do infrastructure. Gas tax is obviously one of the real possibilities. But I think you have to first agree that the roads, bridges, tunnels, ports, schools, broadband, all of the kinds of things, hospitals, the kinds of things that we need improved, aren't going to do it by themselves. It has to be paid for. And you can't pay for it with a tax cut.
Look, I think you're 100% correct. You have to pay for these things. Let's get to the government shutdown. Congressman Bobby Scott with us, Democrat, 3rd District, Virginia. Let's get to government shutdown coming in a couple of weeks, running out of money, like you mentioned. The president putting an immigration reform package on the table, which includes amnesty and a pathway to citizenship for 2 million people that kids whose parents brought them here illegally, 800,000 applicants. The president's saying, look, there's another million of these kids that haven't applied because they don't want to get in a registry. Let's just take care of this whole thing, fix it all. And along with that, let's secure the border. Let's get rid of chain migration that really doesn't make any sense in today's economy. And let's go to a merit-based system, and let's get rid of the visa lottery program, which has some other issues with it, tends to bring in unskilled, uneducated people that can't find jobs, end up on welfare, some of them. So some of that makes sense. Long-term immigration reform.
One of the problems is he keeps conflating immigration with crime. All of his visitors in the gallery that were associated with immigration were victims of crime. And when you kind of define immigrants as criminals, as he did in his announcement speech, it makes it difficult to have a coherent discussion. So-called chain immigration is just family unification, whether or not someone is a citizen, whether they can bring their spouse and children, and how big the family circle gets can be discussed. But eliminating that altogether, I think, would be a mistake. I think we have family values, and keeping families together is a positive value. In terms of merit, I mean, I think the president, when he made the comments about certain countries and then mentioned Norway as a country we need more people from, obviously that has nothing to do with merit and all to do with race. So I think we have to focus on immigration where everybody has a fair chance, and we've had proposals. The Senate had a strong bipartisan bill a few years ago. We can deal with the children. There are things that we can do, but I think it makes it difficult when you start off the conversation with the suggestion that immigrants are associated with crime, and more immigrants means more crime, and people, and you ought to be scared to death about somebody crossing the border.
Congressman, I'm going to agree
with a visa.
I'm going to agree with those two comments you made, because I think you're really spot on here. I thought the Norway comment was a very unfortunate one to make because it really muddied the waters, as you said. It took it from economics to what appeared to be race. Bad idea. And even though we had just met with the Norwegian prime minister, words matter. So I thought that was just, he shouldn't have said that. I don't think he meant anything by it, but it doesn't matter. And I agree with you that all of the merit-based immigration reform, which I believe we should go to, that Australia has done, Canada has done, and many other countries, that is an economic issue. That is a prosperity for all Americans issue. And I think when you just highlight crime, I think that also sends a different message. People can understand the economic message. We want people to come here, be able to find jobs, get work, and be productive members of society, and bring their immediate families, just not everybody else. Let's get to this memo.
Well,
Have you had a chance?
I think one thing about merit is, I think when you talk about merit, people kind of think high-tech and highly educated. There are a lot of jobs for which we need immigrants that are very low-skilled jobs in the seafood industry, locally, in agriculture. There are a lot of people, people come in to do jobs that are very difficult to find domestic workers. And so when you talk about merit, you have to be careful you're not excluding them, because that is a very important part of the immigration, making sure that people can come in and do the kinds of jobs that Americans just frankly won't do.
It's like I say, I use two examples. If the U.S. economy has identified a need for pipe fitters, and you're a pipe fitter in Nigeria and you're trying to immigrate to the United States, you're going to get to the top of the line. If the economy is saying, if businesses are saying we have a need for landscapers, and you're a landscaper from Nairobi, you're going to get to the top of the line. That's what merit-based is. And I'm glad you brought that out, because it just isn't, I have a master's degree from the University of whatever in computer technology. It depends on
we have people, you don't even have, to a large extent, you don't have to have high skills. You just have to be willing to do the work.
Right.
You can learn how to work in the seafood industry, picking crabs and that kind of thing. If you're willing to do the work. You talk to some of the people in that industry, trying to find people to do the work is challenging, but there are people willing to come in and do it.
Right. The whole thing with a merit-based immigration platform is we want to be sure that those coming to the United States, those that can find employment and support themselves, that they get to the top of the line. That's basically what it's about.
Some of the jobs for which we are using immigration are jobs. One, we found in the high-tech industry that there is massive discrimination against minorities and women in the high-tech industry, such that if they didn't discriminate, there would be plenty of domestic workers. And things like welders, if you're a welder from a foreign country, well, we need more apprenticeship programs so that people in the United States can qualify for some of those good jobs.
Right.
We're working, and there's bipartisan work on apprenticeship programs right now. We're working out some of the details, but we hope we can come to a good resolution on significantly improving apprenticeship programs. That may be part of the Higher Education Act reauthorization. But when you mentioned welders and those kinds of things, those are jobs that we need to make sure that domestic young people have the opportunity to learn those skills and get the good jobs.
Congressman, I want to get to this memo. We're with Congressman Bobby Scott. He is a Democrat, 3rd District of Virginia. He's got a very long district, but it goes up through the peninsula, based in the Newport News area. Congressman, have you seen this memo?
Well, it's not long anymore. It used to go to Richmond, but the federal courts took care of that, and now it's just cities and Hampton Roads, all right along Hampton Roads, with the exception of Franklin, right at the end of Isle of Wight. It's a very small area, but otherwise it's Newport News, Hampton, Norfolk, Portsmouth, Chesapeake, Suffolk, Isle of Wight, in Franklin, everything in Hampton, all are parts of just in Hampton Roads, not Virginia Beach. So it's one of the more compact districts now.
And you're also my congressman, so I appreciate that. Have you seen the memo,
Good.
sir?
John, no. I have been focused on trying to reauthorize the Higher Education Act, criminal justice reform, K through 12 education, implementing the Every Student Succeeds Act, working on the budget, trying to keep the government open. I'm quite frankly relying on Director Mueller and his investigation to come up with whatever we need to know. And when he reports, we'll have something to work with. This memo thing was authored by a gentleman whose activities in collusion with the White House required him to recuse himself from the investigation. The FBI has labeled the memo misleading and inaccurate. The Department of Justice in the Trump administration has said it's reckless. They're going to release the Republican memo and not release the Democratic memo. And now you have allegations that they may have changed it before they sent it to the White House, and a committee transcript that shows that the Chairman Nunes did not deny that the memo was written in cahoots with the White House. With all that going on, I'm just choosing to wait until Director Mueller makes a report, and then I'll start doing my homework.
I only have a minute, but I just got to toss this in. In your justice reform, are you looking at changing the way district attorneys in the United States are pleading things out? I mean, there's a lot of concern now that DAs all over the U.S. are giving out very harsh sentences and then offering or trying to get them and then offering to plea it down into something that really, so that people end up taking these deals and spending a lot more time in prison than they would under normal circumstances. Is that something you guys are looking at?
Yeah, and overcharging and threatening people with decades worth of time is one of the reasons why a lot of innocent people end up pleading guilty, because they can't take a chance or can't afford to go to trial. Somebody may believe somebody that's not telling the truth, and if you lose, you're looking at decades, and you may be able to get off in just a couple of years, so you just plead guilty. There's a lot of that going on. One of the things we do is try to eliminate virtually all of the mandatory minimums for drug crimes, and that's one of the reasons that the prosecutors can threaten the time, because the judge has no discretion. They can look at a crime that's relatively minor in terms of your role in a criminal activity. It could be, but the mandatory minimum requires the judge to impose decades. If you're looking at that, and the judge has no discretion to impose a sentence that makes sense, you may in fact be looking at decades. There's a girlfriend problem where if a girlfriend drives a boyfriend to a drug deal, and then she gets swept up in the in the bus, when she comes to get sentenced for her little role in the conspiracy, the judge has to sentence her based on the weight of the drugs in the conspiracy. So if the boyfriend was dealing a ton of crack, a judge has to look on the chart, ton of crack, you get 20 years. Well, really? And there are plenty of people in jail. In fact, President Obama had a plan where he was giving commutations to people who were low-level, nonviolent, essentially first offenders who had already served 10 years. Well, how did somebody low-level, nonviolent first offender get 10 years to begin with? It's those mandatory minimums. So one of the things that we do, and our thoughts are with Jason Lewis, who was the one member who went to the hospital on the train accident. He and I work. He's a conservative Republican from Minnesota. He and I are working on the Safe Justice Act to make sure that those mandatory minimums get eliminated.
All right, we're out of time. I want to thank Congressman Bobby Scott for being with us. Democrat, 3rd District of Virginia. He's also my congressman, and We appreciate that. Great constituent service I get. Best ever in history. Congressman, thanks for being with us. Always a pleasure.
Thank you, John. Okay.